Hi, I'm Chris. I'm an alcoholic.
Hi.
My sobriety date is February 5th, 1987. Glad to be here tonight, and thank you for inviting me. Good to be in a meeting of Alcoholics Anonymous, and good to see some old friends and some ex-sponsees, and a surprise visit from a sponsee that happens to be on the Zoom board. He's just trying to score brownie points. And my old friend Curtis, it's funny as I haven't seen Curtis in years. And when I saw him outside, I immediately called the sponsor and I said, "Hey, Curtis is here," And he said, "Oh, that's great. I'm so glad to see him, getting into meetings and making meetings and so forth." And then, as like a lot of us do, when you're talking to other AA members, they offer unsolicited advice. And his sponsor did just that. And he said, "Hey," he goes, "you know what?" He goes, "Tonight when you're talking," he goes, "speak slowly, enunciate very clearly, and don't use any big words. We want Curtis to get the message too." So if it seems like I'm dumbing down my story, it's just on behalf of Curtis is here. So anyway, my sobriety is February 5th, 1987, and my last drink was February 4th. And this is a really interesting thing only to me, but I tell it every time, as some of you know who were there last night, and that is my last drink was on February 4th, 1987, but also my last pickled egg was on February 4th of 1987 also. And the reason for that is that I have never, with a sober mind, looked at a jar full of like this yellow syrupy goop with hard-boiled eggs floating around in it and thought, "God, that looks appetizing." And yet that was like the staple of my diet in the bars. So before I ever even picked up my first drink, I always felt on the outside. Let me look and get an idea of my timing here. Okay. I always felt on the outside. I always just felt different than other people. Bill Wilson described it as that there seemed to be a strange barrier between him and other people. And that was the case with me. It seemed like there was everybody in this world and there was me. And there was this strange barrier that existed between me and them. And I could never cross over or bridge that gap and assimilate and mix with those people comfortably. Even though I may have had all sorts of reasons intellectually where I thought I should, I just never did. I could look over there at those people and compare my insides to I could compare my outsides with their outsides. And in doing that, I should fit. But something inside here that I came shipped to this world with prevented me from doing that. And what that was is it seems like I was born with this innate sense that I wasn't enough. And no matter what I did, it wasn't quite good enough, and I didn't measure up to, and I felt inferior to them, even though in one respect I felt superior to them. I could look at those people on the other side of the strange barrier, and I might recognize that I'm more accomplished than them. And therefore, I should be able to mix with them and actually feel a little bit better than them. And it wasn't the case. The minute I got over there, I didn't. I could be smarter, better looking, drive a cooler car, have cooler clothes. It didn't matter what I had. I always seemed to not fit and not be enough with them. In addition to this, I also was somebody that when I wasn't drinking, when I was sober, I lived with this constant, like low-grade anxiety when there was no impetus for this anxiety. I just had this fear of people, this fear of life, just this fear, peppered with sometimes moments of just absolute terror for no reason. I also seemed to live with just this constant state of malaise, just this low-grade depression almost. And nothing seemed to fix that. Nothing I did could seem to make that better. Any victories in life were short-lived, and within a day or two, I was right back. And in that constant state of malaise, I was also checkered with periods of just dark depression when there was no reason for me to have depression. There was nothing in my life that should create that. And alcohol fixed this. A certain amount of drinks, my shoulders would come down. This mind that was just constantly on me and just racing would slow down to a manageable pace. I could take a deep breath and I felt okay. And I could do the one thing that I always wanted to do, and that was cross that invisible barrier and mix with those people in a way that I never could mix with them without alcohol. Alcohol was not my problem. Alcohol was my solution. Alcohol was the elixir that fueled my boilers and allowed me to participate in life when I was incapable of participating in life without it. I love everything about drinking. It fixed what needed fixing inside of me. I started drinking at an early age. My drinking career was only 11 years long. For whatever reason, it progressed very rapidly. I'm 60 years old today. The proper response to that is, geez, oh, never know. Drink some coffee. Let's get with it here. But anyway, my magic number of drinks was 8 to 10 beers. 8 to 10 beers made me feel like what I thought those people felt like normally. 8 to 10 beers allowed me to be the person I always knew I was capable of being. And the thing that prevented me from being the person I always was meant to be, because all of us come to this world with natural abilities and attributes and so forth. I lived up to none of them. And the reason being is I had all these old ideas, these self-centered fears, and these self-limiting beliefs that prevented me from breaking away from me and actually being me. And alcohol freed me of that. It freed me from the bondage of self and allowed me to come out and live. And I could dance, I could date, I could talk, whatever it was, I could do it. The fear of people would leave me at that point. Anyway, so I love drinking. My drinking career lasted 11 years, as I mentioned. In those 11 years, it progressed very rapidly. I was a daily drinker right out of the gate and ultimately ended up becoming a daily drunk, a daily blackout oblivion drunk. And I started at a young age. I had problems right off the bat. I rolled cars, wrecked motorcycles, got my first DUI, I think when I was like 17 or so, had problems with other alcohol-related arrests as a teenager. And one of the things also I mentioned, because of the readings you guys went through, I didn't know this at the time. I only know this in hindsight. But one of the things that I had going on, and I just described a little bit of this, is I always had a desire for unity. And what I mean by a desire for unity is the way that looked was I've always been looking for my people all my life. All my life, I've been looking for my people, where I fit, because I fit nowhere. I was one of those people, by the way. Yeah, I skipped that. I don't have time to go into that. Anyway, I did a lot of geographics during my drinking, and the impetus behind a lot of the geographics were drinking related, but also a lot of the geographics I did were me seeking my people, a place where I could fit. And my first geographic in that instance was when I went to high school. I knew that I didn't fit in the public school system. And if I could only go to an all boys prep school, that would be a place, because they dressed differently, did things differently, used a different dialect, so forth. That would be where I would fit. And I didn't fit. And anyway, I went to this prep school. I had a lot of problems there as a result of my drinking. It was a school where we drank in that high school very similar to the way they drink in the Greek system in colleges. I mean, we had keg parties every Thursday, Friday, Saturday nights, and Sunday mornings. And I lived at those, and I drank at home the other nights. I got kicked out of that high school for a drinking-related incident my senior year. And by that time, I knew that what the problem was that I was raised in Portland, Oregon, and suburban Portland, Oregon. And what I knew that the problem was is that I'm not a city guy. I don't fit in suburbia and prep schools and so forth. And that if I could only move to rural Oregon and become a logger, that would be my people. And so when I got kicked out of that high school, I did exactly that. I moved to the woods and became a logger, and did that for multiple of years, and just took my alcoholism right along with me. And by the way, welcome to all the people that are new to Alcoholics Anonymous. And I'll say this just in case so I don't forget. When I came to Alcoholics Anonymous, there was no question I had a problem with alcohol. It was, I mean, you could point at me and recognize that guy's got a problem with alcohol. But my secret was, when I came here, was I thought also I was insane. And what made me think that I was insane was all of that stuff I described about being on the outside, and all the anxiety and depression, and just this racing brain that I had that I couldn't shut down. I literally thought I was insane. I heard a guy when I was new in AA say, I'd rather have a bottle in front of me than a frontal lobotomy. And I identify with that, because take away my alcohol and it felt like I was just going to break apart. You know, it felt like alcohol was preserving my sanity. And what I came to find out through the immersion of my life into this program is that I didn't have two problems. I wasn't an alcoholic and a neurotic and insane. What I was describing as insanity, I came to find out was called self-centeredness, self-obsession. I was so filled with self-obsession and had such an excessive concentration on me that it manifested in this sense of being different, this sense of isolation and apartness, and in anxiety and in depression. And it was all one thing, alcoholism. So anyway, I spent a few years logging, and, drank with, the best of them, did sort of things. I got our crew kicked out of bars for drinking, for fighting and drinking, so forth, so on, more trouble with the law. Now, my 11 years of drinking, I was arrested 16 times for alcohol-related arrests. No criminal behavior. I mean, no thievery or any sort of, I wasn't a criminal. It was all alcohol related. I had 3 DUIs. I went to a couple treatment centers. I was hospitalized for alcohol withdrawal. I had a lot of consequences in a very short period of time while I was drinking. And, again, for the new person, in case I forget this, is I was speaking at a meeting about 20 years ago. And before I came in to speak, I was thinking how I'd start my talk off, and I decided I would kind of go through the consequences or the lowlights of my drinking. And I did just that. It's like, okay, 16 alcohol-related arrests, 3 DUIs, 2 treatment centers, hospitalized for alcohol withdrawal, medically detoxed, geographics, daily blackout drinking, used to wet the bed, habitually drunk, so forth. And when I got down at the bottom, at the end of this list, out of nowhere, in my mind, a little voice said, maybe you're not really an alcoholic after all. And now I recoiled from that thought as if from a hot flame. And I recoiled from that thought. It scared me and the reason it scared me and I recoiled from it is because I had been working the steps of Alcoholics Anonymous and living the steps and the principles and participating in Alcoholics Anonymous. But the reason I bring that up is this. That was the exact sort of thought that I used to get that would take me to that first drink. When I came to AA, they said, it's the first drink that gets you drunk. If you don't take that first drink, you won't get drunk. Got it. And that's true of me. But what also is true of me, there was something that always happened before I took that first drink. And what happened to me before I first took that first drink was this. I may have had all the conviction in the world that day that I was through with drinking, that I was done. I had a new plan, wasn't going to do it anymore, whatever it was. Or maybe I suffered humiliating consequences the night before, one of those shameful nights, not drinking. Before I ever picked up that first drink, somewhere in here, my mind would say, maybe if you drink this way tonight, or if you don't drink gin tonight, because that always makes you violent, or if you, eat this, or you do that, then I'll be able to drink safely. Then I'd pick up that first drink. And our literature refers to it as the insanity that precedes the first drink. And the thing about the insanity that precedes the first drink for me is that at the time, it doesn't seem insane. It seems like a good idea. It doesn't register as an insanity at all. It actually registers as, how come I've never thought about that before? And I drink. And I did that day after day. The only time that seems like the insanity that precedes the first drink is after I'm sober and I have a mind that has been treated through the steps of Alcoholics Anonymous, and I'm able to look back at it and see that it was insane. Anyway, so after my logging career, I did a stint in college. I made it 2 terms. And in those 2 terms, I never made it to a single class, was put on academic probation, kicked out of campus housing, and was restricted from ever stepping foot on campus housing property again. And allegedly, they had a picture of me in campus security that said, do not approach him alone, that he's dangerous. And so that was my college life. And soon after that, I went through a surrender. And the surrender was this: I gave up on life. I gave up on trying to control my drinking, which I'd been doing and failing at for some time by then. I'd always been trying to plan and manage. And if I'll just drink this way, I'll drink on these days, I'll drink this amount and so forth. Failure after failure after failure. My mantra was I would come 2 a.m. and it happened again. It happened again. I did not intend on drinking that much. And I don't remember the last night. It happened again. And I gave up. I gave up trying to cross over that barrier and mix with those people. And after I did that and I surrendered trying to be like a regular person and accepted what I was, which was an alcoholic, although I didn't use those words, it was the freest I'd ever been in my life. I was free. For the next 3 weeks, I drank to blackout on a daily basis. And at the end of the 3 weeks, I thought to myself, am I ever going to be able to shut this off or slow this down? And my next thought was, I don't care, because this is the best I've ever done in life. This is the freest I've ever been. And I kept drinking that way, and I never was able to turn it off or reel it in. And it just progressively got worse, to a place where the consequences started stacking up. And my days started looking like Groundhog Day, where I would come 2 a.m, always with just a deep sense of shame, deep sense of guilt, deep sense of remorse. Regardless of the night before, if I did anything stupid or not, I lived with those feelings every time I came to in the morning. And I would have the jitters and the shakes and the sweats, and I would piece the blackout from the night before together. And then I'd put the plan a lot of times it was just get through today. I knew more about one day at a time when I was drinking than I ever have in sobriety, because it was just trudging, just make it through today, make it through today. And sometimes I'd put the plans together, or many times I'd have the plan, and it would be, this is it. I'm done. I'm through. I can't do this anymore. It's killing me. I tried all these various things. I tried doing drugs to replace it. That didn't work. I tried geographics. I tried fitness. Everything I could imagine to control and enjoy my drinking or stop my drinking. And none of it worked. And somewhere after that conviction in the morning, I would have that insane thought. And sometimes most of the time, it just seemed like I had changed my mind. I'm drinking, and I drink, and I did it day after day after day. June of 1986, I came to one morning. I was living in Ashland, Oregon at the time, and I patched the blackout from the night before together. And I'd done some really humiliating stuff at the bar the night before. And I was like, oh, God, I got to get out of this town. So I got out on I-5. I hitchhiked 300 miles to Portland because I now no longer had a driver's license from the DUIs. And my plan was, when I got up to Portland, that I would wean myself off of alcohol by drinking beer, a certain amount of beers each day. I did that for like 3 days. I was terrified of the DTs. And after day 3, I started slipping into alcohol withdrawal. I ended up in a medical detox where they pumped me full of Librium for 5 days. And during the 5 days while I was being pumped full of Librium, a member of Alcoholics Anonymous did a 12-step call. Nurse came in, asked if I wanted to talk to them. I didn't, but because I somehow knew what AA was about, even though I had no idea what AA was about. And what I thought AA was about, I was certain that some, goofy little nerdy guy with a blue blazer and a tie and probably carrying, a Bible would come in and, lay religion on me. And so I said, yeah, I'll see this guy. So I went in and I talked to him, and he was dressed that way. He did have a blue blazer on and a tie, but he was the furthest thing from some nerdy guy. And all he did is he told me his drunk log. And I sat there and identified with the guy. I was like, I like this guy. And this guy had SWAT. He was pinned down in his yard by SWAT because he had kicked his ex-wife's door in to retrieve his gun. And he told me drinking stories, and then and so I was looking forward to AA, and then I went to AA and had a complete letdown because I went to AA meetings where the traditions were not adhered to, and there was no primary purpose. And I sat in there desperately not wanting to drink and desperately looking for a solution to my alcoholism. And I heard nothing. I identified with nothing that was going on in these meetings. So I checked that off as not a place for me. I went to a 28-day inpatient treatment center, got out of there, started drinking soon after that, same manner that I had been. Did a geographic later that year to Alaska. I'd come across an ad in the newspapers. I was living with my mom by this time, and I was reading all sorts of literature on drinking and alcoholism, gel mix stuff, all that. I had stacks of books that I had purchased or had checked out. And I was also looking for a job. By this time, I could only hold a job for about 3 weeks at a time. I came across a job in Southeast Alaska. They were looking for loggers to work on an island that was a dry island. And I thought, there we go. I'll move up to this dry island. I'll get a job, go to this, this dry island, dry out. And I had that thought that a lot of new people have, and I certainly did. And that was that if I could put enough dry time together, that somehow that dry time would solve my alcoholism. And what better place to do it on than an island where you can't get alcohol? So I went up, I got the job, went up there, flew out to this island, Hecata Island, went to work as a logger, was there for 3 weeks. And in the third week, we were in the bunkhouse watching the World Series, and these two guys that were new to camp and new to our bunkhouse had come in and they, as we were watching the World Series, they brought out a bottle of whiskey that they had smuggled in, popped the cap off it. They each took a little sip. They turned to me and they said, "Do you want a drink?" And I went from, I'm going to Alaska to cure my alcoholism. In a nanosecond, my mind went from that to, it's been 3 weeks since I've had a drink. I haven't craved alcohol. I didn't get the DTs. I didn't go through withdrawals. I haven't really even thought about alcohol. I'm probably not really an alcoholic. Sure. And I grabbed the bottle. I tipped the bottle up and I went gunk, gunk, gunk. And they grabbed it from me and they said, "Hey, we got to make this last." They brought a bottle of whiskey to have like a little nip off of each night after work, I guess. I thought we were popping the top and killing the bottle as we watched the World Series. And what happened to me is I had the equivalent of probably about 1 to 2 straight shots of whiskey with absolutely no possible way of getting another drink of alcohol. And talk about the phenomenon of craving. Man, it was like an itch that I couldn't scratch. It set the ball in motion. So the next day when the first float plane came into camp, I was on it, into Ketchikan, into the forecastle snake pit, started drinking in there. And by night, I was in Ketchikan jail. And when I came, I was put into a holding cell with 2 other guys. And when I came to in the morning, there was a guy on the top bunk above me. And when I opened my eyes, he was hanging off the bunk looking at me. And I looked up at him and I said, "Can I help you?" And he said, "My name is something." He goes, "I've got 30 days sober in Alcoholics Anonymous and I owe 10 days of jail time. And my sponsor made me come in here and fill the 10 days. And I remember just looking up at him through that kind of that alcohol fog and thought, God, I can't even get away from these AA people in here. And that was kind of the beginning of a series of coincidences, so to speak, that happened in my life that finally led me to you. And that was, so after that, January of 1987, I was down in Southern Oregon doing 8 days of jail time for my 3rd DUI. I was doing it on weekends. Between the 3rd and the 4th weekend, I was arrested midweek for an alcohol-related offense. And during that arrest, the police said, "Mr. Clark, you've got a hell of a drinking problem. You need to do something. You should go see this guy, Joe F. He's an expert on alcoholism." And in attempting to get out of the arrest, I said I would, but I had no intention of doing that. Anyway, they didn't take me to jail. They just cited me and took me home or let me go or something. Anyway, the next day I was walking down the street. And as I was walking down the street, there was one of those, you see them in a lot of towns where there's like a preacher, sidewalk preacher that reads Bible passages to anybody that will walk by or listen. And Ashland had one of those guys, and I came walking past him, and he read something out of the Bible. I have no idea what it was, but it resonated with me because whatever it was that I heard seemed to correlate with the police saying I should go see this guy, Joe F. And I thought, as I continued on walking, as like, if I was one of these people that believed in God or a higher power, I would think that that's like the hand of God at work in my life. And I should actually go see this guy, Joe F. And then I kept on walking. And then I had just an intuitive thought or a moment of inspiration. And all it was simply, what if, for once in my life, I don't dismiss the God stuff as being stupid and trivial. And even though I don't believe in it, I go and see Joe anyway. And this was long before I had ever heard the terminology act as if. And I thought, yeah, what do I have to lose? Maybe he went to the Schick Center and did aversion therapy, 10 days, couple 2-day follow-ups, because that was my next plan, was to do that. And so I went up and I went to go see this guy, Joe. I went into his office, and Joe had 9 months sober in Alcoholics Anonymous. He told me a little bit of his story, what he used to be like, what happened, what he's like now, and invited me to an AA meeting. I didn't want to go, but I felt kind of obligated to go since I asked this guy for help, and I said, yeah, I'll go. He took me to the meeting that night. It was the Clay Street group in Ashland. And I walked in, sat in the very back, and the steps of Alcoholics Anonymous have changed me from the inside out and have given me a life beyond my wildest dreams and have freed me in ways that I never thought were possible. as a design for living. However, I never would have given these steps a chance had it not been for the traditions of Alcoholics Anonymous. I never would have gotten a sponsor, read a big book, considered the existence of a power greater than myself, or continued to go to meetings had it not been for the traditions. I said I've always been looking for my people, and I've always had this sense of a desire for unity. I walked into this room full of people, and I could not have not been more out of place than with these people. We were not people that would normally mix, me and this group, and they wouldn't mix with me. But because of the adherence to the traditions of Alcoholics Anonymous, the 10th tradition that was alive and well, there was no discussion of politics, religion, any controversial outside issues of any sort. Because I can assure you that these people are on the other side of the political aisle than me. They were from a socioeconomic background that was very different than me. And religiously, they were very, very different from me. In fact, a lot of them belonged to a religion that I'd spent most of my life having a great deal of contempt for. But there was no discussion of that. There was no bumper stickers on their cars in the parking lot. They were wearing no buttons with pro this or anti that. And I sat down in the back of the room and they asked for new people. I introduced myself because I did believe I was an alcoholic. I just didn't think AA was a solution for me. And the woman got up and she gave about a 25-minute pitch and she told what she used to be like, what happened, what she's like now. And she focused on the one thing that we all have in common, and that was alcoholism. And it's not that this room had plenty of experience with all sorts of other drugs and so forth. But the one thing that they all had in common was this problem with alcohol. And then each person did exactly the same thing during the participation. And somewhere in the middle of this, by them adhering to the traditions, they had created an atmosphere of identification where somebody like me who was an alcoholic but knew that AA wasn't for me, I heard the music. And the way I heard the music was somewhere in the middle of it, my head started nodding a little bit. And then they each one shared. And what happened to me was by the time I left that meeting, I knew that that was a room full of people that drank the way I drank, felt the way I felt, and thought the way I thought, and they were staying sober. And the other thing was, and I didn't know this at the time, I only knew this in hindsight, and that is this room full of people that were on the other side of the political aisle than me, religiously different than me, very different backgrounds. A lot of them came from a religion that I had a great deal of contempt for. They were my people. I'd found my people because they came here with a singleness of purpose and left all the outside crap on the outside and focused on alcoholism. All my life, I've been looking for them, and here they were, and we weren't even, this particular group, we were nothing alike. So I continued drinking for one more week after that meeting, and on February 4th of 87, I went out with one more plan to control my drinking or be the exception to the rule. I was going to drink 10 drinks, shut it down early, come home early from the bars, be like a regular person. I bought a 12-pack of beer to drink on the way down to the bars, but the guy who was giving me a ride was late, so I drank 9 of them sitting there waiting for him. So I pretty much blew my plan before I even left. Went down to the bars, ended up assaulting a bartender because he cut me off, and the police were called, and one more time I was arrested. The difference between, like any other night, I mean, this was just not a big deal of a night, except I was defeated. I broke. Something happened that night. All the fight was gone. I didn't spew obscenities at the police. I didn't, nothing. I just started weeping, and they cuffed me. They put me in the back of the car, and I just sat there and wept in the back of the car. I was beaten. They took me down, printed me, processed me. They didn't hold me overnight. They just, at the end of the processing, they took me home, and I was just defeated. And I walked in to my apartment. I laid down on my bed, and my last conscious thought before I went to sleep or passed out was, something's different about tonight. I wonder if I'll feel this way in the morning. And when I came to in the morning, it was different still. And what it was is I had surrendered. And death was a more attractive alternative than to continue living that morning. And death did not scare me. What scared me was to continue on living. And had I had a crystal ball that I kind of looked into and said, if I just drink like this for 6 more months, I'd be dead, I would have just drank myself to death. What I was terrified of is I was going to keep living like this for the next 5 years or the next 10 years and continue to just spiral further and further down into this miserable life and existence that I was living. And in that defeat and desperation, I reached out to a God that I did not believe in. And my exact prayer was, please kill me or make this stop. And then I said a prayer from my childhood religion. And what happened that morning, again, a lot I only know from hindsight, and that is this. After saying that prayer to this power that I didn't believe in, the obsession to drink alcohol that I lived with on a daily basis for a long time was completely removed, and it's never come back. The other thing that has happened is that I became willing to go into Alcoholics Anonymous and do everything that they were doing in AA, despite whether I believed in it, whether I thought it was hokey and stupid. I would do it because I knew those people were like me and they were staying sober. And so I came into Alcoholics Anonymous and I started doing AA. And I will say that I'm very grateful that I got sober in 1987 in a small town because I didn't have the ability to go to 9 meetings in 90 days because there wasn't 90 meetings to go to in 90 days. We didn't have meetings every day. We didn't have a big fellowship where you could go, like if you missed the 9 a.m. meeting on some days, that's it. You're done. Had nothing to do until tomorrow. So what it forced me to do was to rely on God. And it forced me to rely on what was written in that big book. And it forced me to rely on the steps. And instead of trying to outrun my alcoholism by service and ceaseless meeting attendance, it forced me to dive into spirituality and God and just hope that that was real. And what happened is, as I did that, I came to believe in this power. And I'll tell you this, because I only have about 4 minutes left. And I did my 4th step. I came to believe in God because there was something happening that was going on in my life that I could not explain. And anyway, I did my 4th step. I wrote a 4th step, and to this date, it was probably structurally the worst inventory I've written. I mean, the columns, I might have had 3 columns, or I might have had 9 columns, I don't know. But what I do know is it's the single best thing I've ever written in my life because it was fearless, it was thorough, it was from the heart, it wasn't an intellectual assignment done out, the perfect way. It was done purely out of desperation because I was terrified I would drink again, and I was terrified I was going to go insane. And I wrote this thing out. I read it to my sponsor. I told him things that I'd never told another human being, which I was convinced I was the only person that was free, that wasn't institutionalized, that had done some of these things. And he had done all of them and more. And I read this stuff to him. And in between steps 5 and step 6, we took a break. I went into the restroom and I looked in the mirror to do this ritual that I had become accustomed to doing for a long time. And what it was I would try to build myself. I'd look at myself and try to build myself up. And I would say like these positive affirmations about myself and so forth, but it never worked because at the end of these positive affirmations, I'd sink right back down to this, I'm not enough. And I went to go do that and it didn't happen. And I waited for it. And instead, I felt a different sensation. And it took me a moment to identify what that sensation was. And what it was comfort. I was comfortable in my own skin. It's the first time I'd ever been comfortable in my own skin without a certain amount of alcohol in my system. And that's been the story of my life in Alcoholics Anonymous. It was that made me a believer in AA as a way of life, not just a way to expel the obsession to drink alcohol. And I can tell you this, that I'm so grateful that I bought all those little things when I first got here. I was all in. I was all in on God, whether I believed in this God or not. I was all in on these steps. And I believed that I had no choice but to really do this thing and live this thing in order to even have a chance to survive. And I put first things first and put sobriety, my sobriety and God and this program up here, and everything else has been here. And what has happened to me as I've lived a life, I have my own business. I'll give you an example. When I was 3 years sober, I got a new sponsor and we were doing our third step. We did it in downtown Portland. I was in a coat and tie and a suit and tie. He was in a suit and tie. And he decided, I needed to do the third step again with him. We just do it right there at lunch break where there's like 300 other people around. And so I did it, which is kind of whatever, it's a story. But here's the thing that gets me. I was 3 years sober. 3 years earlier, I was wetting the bed on a regular basis. I couldn't hold a job. I was arrested 9 times in the last 12 months of my drinking. I was a complete neurotic mess and terrified of people. 3 years later, I was working for an investment firm in downtown Portland. I had my own apartment. I had my own car. Didn't have a driver's license, but I had my own car. And how could I go through that transformation? But I did. Anyway, I've been married for 33 years to the girl that I always wanted to marry. And that's just purely Alcoholics Anonymous. My solution today in life is still AA 101 and God. And I believe this more than anything. I'll close with this. It's what Chuck C used to say. My business is to do his business, and his business is to take care of me. And that's been my experience. My experience in almost 39 years of sobriety is that when I place my dependence on God and I act on what seems to be inspiration or intuitive thoughts, I'm batting 1,000% so far. It's worked out every time. Uncommon sense has become common sense. My name is Chris. I'm an alcoholic. Thank you for my sobriety.